Chapter 7. Priya. It was early morning by the time the maidservants made it down from the Hirana and back into the mahal. Bilu had a plate of food warm and ready for them, and they divided the roti and pickles between themselves. Gauri excused herself quickly, claiming she needed to rest. "We should rest too," said Sima, dabbing her roti through the leftover fragrant oil and brine. Priya opened her mouth and Sima raised a finger up to stop her. "Don't speak until you've finished eating. Please." Priya rolled her eyes and swallowed down her mouthful of food with a swig of water, then said, "I'm not tired yet." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the orchard," she said. "Bilu," she called, and the cook turned from the humongous pile of onions he was hacking his way through. "I'm heading over to the orchard, so if you want me to carry anything to the boys—" "You should be going to sleep," scolded Bilu, but he gave her some parathas to carry with her and a big flask of tea, the steam carrying the warm perfume of cardamom. "Tell them there's a little onion sabzi left if they're quick, but I won't send it with you, too messy." The few people with rot in the household have been assigned the task of clearing the blighted acres of the regent's orchard, alongside the servants who usually manage to care of the regent's trees. The rat-ridden were, after all, already marked. They couldn't be infected again, or that is the logic used, at least. For days they had been working from light, hacking down the branches and piling them into a bonfire. Priya followed the smoke and found them clearing an old tree. It was vast, thick trunks with deep, sprawling roots that were half visible, now that the soil around the base had been cleared away. The roots had been pared open so that the interior would begin to dry out and catch alight more easily. The men working wore cloth wrapped around their mouths to stop them from breathing in the worst of the smoke, but Priya wasn't half as prepared. She drew her palu over her mouth as she balanced the food and the flask against her hip, taking shallow breaths and trying not to think of all the things the smell of smoke always made her think of. Her brother's arms around her, blood, the Hirana, the princess, staring at her with bloodshot eyes dark as pitch. "Are you real?" She forced the thought back and peered through the haze until she caught sight of a familiar small figure staggering under an enormous pile of wood. "Rook," Priya called. He looked over the stack and his eyes creased with a smile when he saw her. He excitedly flung the wood onto the bonfire. "I've brought everyone food," she yelled out, and there were relieved noises from the other men as they lowered their machetes. There were vats of salted water set nearby, and all the workers poured pitchers of it over their own hands before they began to eat, to cleanse their skin. Salt, some thought, helped keep the rot at bay. "How is life as a servant going?" Priya asked Rook after she had parceled out the food and passed the flask of tea to the nearest man, who murmured his thanks. "The food is great," Rook said, wiping the wet hands on his tunic. His eyes were fixed on the parathas. He grabbed one quickly. Priya wanted to interrogate him a little more. She'd only seen him now and then since leaving him in Khalid's care, usually in the times when he came to eat in the kitchens in the early morning, along with the rest of the servants. Once or twice he'd come to sit with her after dinner and let her tell him yaksa tales. That was all. But he was tucking into the food with such joyful vigor that she hated to interrupt him, so she sighed and said, "Give me your hand." She took hold of his wrist. "You can eat with the other one." "It's a lot better," he said, through a mouthful of food. "Doesn't hurt as much." "Don't talk with your mouth full." He pushed the rest of the paratha into his mouth, cheeks stuffed, and nodded quickly. She bent her head to hide her grin, inspecting his fingers. The bead hung snug at his wrist and a strong thread. She felt a wave of relief. His rot was no better, but it was no worse. The skin still puckered around the growth beneath it, but unbroken. The bead of sacred wood was working its magic. "When the bead goes cold, come to me straight away," she said. "Before it gets worse, Rook. Not after." "Okay," he said mildly. "I promise." He added under a stern look. "You should probably join them," she said, gesturing over at the others. "I've got to go to bed anyway." She resisted the urge to ruffle his shorn hair. He wouldn't appreciate that in front of others. "In a second," he said. He rocked back on his heels a little, eyes lowered. "Priya, will you—" He hesitated. "Will you do me another favor?" "Another favor?" she asked, incredulous. "You mean besides getting you a job? You do have some cheek," she paused. Well, it depends on what it is. Please don't go up the Harana this week. That was not what she expected. At all this week? All week, he confirmed. He swallowed. Please. It was such an absurd request that she could only laugh. When he raised his head, she arched an eyebrow at him. How will I keep a job if I don't work, You think the regent keeps on women who don't pull their own weight? Say you're sick. They won't make you climb if you're sick. And you said his wife is kind. She wouldn't let him send you off. Rook pressed on, determined. Please, Priya. Everyone says that place is haunted. And after what happened with you and Sima was the one who fell, Priya pointed out, not me, and you're not asking her to fake illness, are you? She's not you, said Rook. You're the one who spends your money on sacred wood for children with rot. No one else wasted that on us. You're the one who gave me this chance, not her or anyone else. His expression was solemn, filled with an earnestness that was both childish and somehow too mature for that sharp, small face to contain. Priya, just, please, for a week, until the rains die down. You'll have a place here no matter what happens to me, she said. Maybe he needed to hear that, needed to be sure. But I have no plans to get hurt. If I have a choice, I'll be around to help you, you understand? Some things we can't control, Rook. We both know what the world is like. As long as I can help, I will. But I can't help if I don't work. You still shouldn't go, Rook said mulishly. As he glanced down, Priya recognized what he was trying to hide. Guilt. Is there some other reason you don't want me climbing? She asked carefully. Rook said nothing. Then awkwardly he muttered, because you matter to me. That's very sweet, she said. Why else? I've told you the truth. He sounded wounded, but Priya wasn't convinced. Don't mistake my being soft-hearted for being a fool, Priya said levelly. You're not good at hiding your feelings. It's not safe, he repeated. Come now, Priya coaxed. What have you heard? Have the maids been making up tales of dangerous and evil spirits? Surely you know better than to listen to them. Rook shook his head. Never mind. I'm going to eat now. Rook. She was fairly certain that it wasn't ghost stories that had him biting his lip and tugging that thread around his wrist. But she wasn't sure how to get the truth out of him. You should listen to me, he said, frustrated. He took a step back. Another. You should trust me. I trusted you. That's not how trust works, he told him, baffled. When she tried to follow him, he began to run, pelting his way into the trees. One of the men yelled after him, warning him to come back or he'd get a beating later, but he didn't reappear. Eventually, she gave up waiting for him to return and went to the dormitory instead, flinging herself down on her mat, exasperated and exhausted, staring at the ceiling until she finally, begrudgingly, fell asleep. When she woke, it was evening, the air velvety with dying warmth, and Sima was sitting cross-legged on the bedroll beside her own, undressed, her shoulders still damp from bathing. Sima was sewing up her sari blouse, the sleeve torn clean in two. What a mess, Priya murmured. I ripped it when I fell, Sima said. Why didn't you rest earlier? I was looking for Rook. Sima gave a faint snort. Of course you were. What does that mean? Nothing. He was looking for you, too, she said lightly. Did you do something to make him angry? Why would you say that? He doesn't want you to earn a living, apparently. He asked me to give you this. Sima fished into her bedroll, pulled something out in her fist. He said he'll take it back if you return it to him after sunset. He was here? When I was waiting for him in the orchard? She let out a groan. Hand it over. Sima dropped the bead of sacred wood, still threaded on the string, into Priya's palm. Fool boy, Priya cursed. He knows he needs to wear it constantly. She clutched the bead tighter, the heat of it radiating against her skin. My fall must have scared him, said Sima. It did, Priya exhaled, frustrated. But I told him I can look after myself. I saved you, after all. Sima shook her head, drew on her sari blouse over her damp shoulders, brushing her hair back from her neck. That won't stop him from worrying, said Sima. He's trying to protect you. He's a child, said Priya. Doesn't he know it's the elder's job to protect him, not the other way around? Why would he know that? Sima asked bluntly. Sima was right, of course. He had no one before Priya had brought him to the mahal. If his family had been farmers, they'd probably died of starvation when their crops had grown rot-riven, leaving him alone. He likely had come to Hiranaprastha without anyone to care for him. Besides, Sima went on, most of us, we see children with rot that bad and we look away. There's no point crying over something you can't fix. Even a sick child? Especially, maybe, Sima murmured, smoothing down the sleeve of her blouse. There's so many of them, you'd never stop. Priya, you're kind to care about him, kind for all the little things you do out in the city, but you're going to break your heart over that boy when he dies. And he will die. My heart is fine, Priya said, a little stiffly. You don't have to worry about me. After an uncomfortable silence, Sima spoke again, more gently. Give him a few days. He'll stop worrying. I'll tell Gauri you're not well. Priya uncurled her fingers and stared down at the bead. A few days. That made sense. But Rook had asked her not to climb the Hirana for a single week. If he was worried about her safety, why set a time length at all? Why not ask her to give up the job entirely? Something wasn't right. She'd known that when Rook had made his request, but the certainty had only grown stronger. I need to speak to Bhumika, she thought. Dread coiled in her belly. I need to do it now. How long until sunset? She asked. Not long. If only he'd been honest with her. She hadn't known he had any guile in him. I'll simply have to worry him then, Priya said. She lifted the thread up and looped it over her own wrist. I'll return it to him in the morning. She made her way swiftly down the servants' corridors, the maze-like routes created so they could travel through the palace without crossing paths with the nobility. Eventually, she emerged into the central garden of the mahal and began to walk toward the Rose Palace. Lady Bhumika was a woman who valued privacy and beauty, and her quarters reflected that. Instead of living in the grand opulence of the mahal, she maintained her closest household in the Rose Palace, a manse with the rose garden that lay at the heart of the grounds. Its doors were surrounded by fronds of flowers, sheaves of white and burgundy, pink and glorious red. Usually the doors of the Rose Palace were flung open, the sumptuous carpet of the living room crowded with visiting high-born women who sat under a ceiling inlaid with a starburst of emeralds cut to resemble leaves, listening to music and drinking wine, laughing and playing the kind of frivolous games of politics that Priya had little patience for. But today the doors were shut, the air painfully quiet, and there were only two people at the entrance. The sour-faced senior maidservant Khalida was speaking to another woman. The other woman was carrying a case at her side. It was open at the top, and even from a distance Priya could see its contents. Vials, calipers. She was a physician. Priya stopped in her tracks as both women caught sight of her. Girl, Khalida said, what are you doing here? I've come to clean my lady's chambers, ma'am, she said, bowing her head in respect, keeping her voice demure. Not today, Khalida said. Our lady is unwell. She doesn't have time for you. Go away now. At another time, Priya would have pushed or bribed or cajoled Khalida into allowing her entrance. But time was running short before dusk, and the physician was still standing by, looking between them. Priya knew there would be no bending of the rules around a stranger, so instead she bowed her head again. Ma'am. She turned and walked away. As she did so, she heard the physician's voice rise in a question, and Khalida's voice respond. One of Our Lady's strays. Barefoot beggars, all of them. She can't stand to see an orphan go hungry, but they do like to whine for scraps. I hope a rat eats your hair, Khalida, Priya thought sourly. A stray. It wasn't untrue, not really, but that only made the words sting all the more. It was a night of miracles. Priya made it to the base of the Hirana with time to spare, and Gauri did not say anything, which meant the princess had not mentioned Priya's mistake to Lady Pramila. Thankfully, there had been no rain for hours, so the Hirana's surface had baked dry in the day's sun. And despite Mina's insipid trembling, she too turned up at dusk, scampering behind the others with a pack of firewood strapped to her back. Let me carry that for you, Priya offered, but Mina shook her head. Oh no, I can do it. Only, will you carry the lantern? Priya agreed, and they began their climb. The moon was full, fat, and gleaming, its silver light almost as strong as the lantern glow. At the Hirana's summit, the guards checked them for weapons, allowing them entry, and Pramila greeted them with her usual frosty instructions before they went to work. Priya was sweeping the floor clean of cooking fire ash when Gauri grabbed her by the arm. "Come," Gauri snapped. "Mina's gone missing again. Find her and bring her to me. I can understand her being afraid yesterday, but twice in a row is too much." "Ma'am," she said deferentially. She put her broom aside and walked off. "Tell her if she does this again, she won't have a job. Do you hear me, Priya? Tell her that." Priya headed straight for the Triveni, but there was no sign of Mina on the plinth or anywhere else. The air was clear and cold, and Priya was alone with nothing but her own memories, the lines upon the floor, and the knowledge that the prisoner lay on the other end of the Triveni, one corridor away. She had tried not to think of the princess, but she couldn't help it. Those eyes. She pictured them and something nameless flooded through her. For a moment, she had felt as she were staring into a dark mirror. Her past reflected back at her and made into something new. Priya knew that what everyone knew about the princess, and only that. Emperor Chandra had ordered his sister to rise to the pyre alongside her handmaidens, to sacrifice themselves as the mothers of flame had done so long ago. But the princess had refused the honor, and now she was here. "You almost burned too," Priya thought as she stared at the corridor. "Just like me." That voice, the rasp of it, that mouth, shaping words in the semi-dark. "Are you real?" "Stop being a damn fool," Priya told herself. But she found herself crossing the Triveni again, barely paying attention to the velvet night sky around her, or the figures of the Yaksa carved into the great pillars holding the ceiling up above her. She moved as though the dark corridor ahead of her and the lattice wall that lay within it were light, and she were particularly stupid moth. "Priya," a small voice. "Stop." The voice came from behind her. Priya turned. Mina was behind her. In one crooked arm she was cradling a small pile of firewood. Her face was strangely pale. "I need your help," said Mina. "What's happened?" Priya asked, alarmed. "Are you injured?" "No." "Is anyone else?" When Mina shook her head, Priya said, "Then what is it?" When Mina remained silent, a heartbeat too long, Priya pressed on. "Let's go back to the kitchens. I'll ask Sima to brew you a cup of tea, something to calm your nerves." "I know what you are," Mina said, at the end of her words a quiver. Priya's words died abruptly. "I knew it the moment you saved Sima, when you moved. You moved like you'd walked on the Hirana before, like the ground knew you." Mina swallowed visibly. Then she said, "You're a temple daughter, or you were once." "You're mistaken," Priya said. "How many times did you pass through the waters before the council died? Are you once born, twice born?" "Mina," Priya said gently, "you're addled. Go to the kitchens now." "I'm not," Mina said firmly. "I'm very sure. I know you're a temple child. You were raised here, in this temple, raised to rule our faith. And then the regent burned you all, didn't he? You and your elders? But you survived somehow, hiding in plain sight. You're not the first I ever met. He told me what to look for. I know." Mina crossed the Triveni. She took hold of Priya's arm. Her grip was like iron. "Look at this," Mina said, voice firm, fierce. So Priya looked. In Mina's left hand, half concealed beneath the drape of her sari, was the shape that Priya had thought was kindling. It was a mask. It must have been hidden among the bundle Mina had been carrying on her back. The guards would not have noticed it when they checked the maidservant for weapons. It was, after all, not a weapon. It was no more than wood, deep and dark, bent and carved into crescents that stretched from the central hollow. But it was beautiful and familiar, and every inch of it carved from boughs of sacred trees. Close to it now, Priya could feel the warmth of it, rich as a bloodied heartbeat. A crown mask. The bead of wood at her wrist didn't hold even the shadow of such power. Priya flinched, despite herself. "You recognize it," Mina said, and her shaky voice was full of triumph. "I don't know what you mean." "Please, Priya, you do. I know you do." Mina took a step closer. "You can help me find the deathless waters. You have to. We need their strength to free ourselves from an empire that has always hated us. From rulers that want us to roll over like dogs for the crime of being better than them." Her grip tightened on the mask. "They've stolen so much from us, our language, our elders. They deemed our culture filthy. They let us starve. We need the waters, Priya. We all do, before it's too late. You're hurting my arm, Priya said steadily. Let go of me, and we'll return to work and forget any of this happened. Aren't you listening to me? Mina's face was a picture of despair. This mad emperor will burn us all. We need to be strong. We need to be what we once were. I am listening to you, Priya said levelly. And I think we should return to work. I think you want something from me that I can't give you. There was a sound beyond the Treveni as two maidservants passed, chattering to one another. Priya stiffened, utterly silent. Do not come in here, she thought. By soil and sky, please do not. They passed, their voices faded. Mina was watching her, intent as an animal gazing upon prey, but she trembled and trembled, as if her own instincts terrified her. Show me the way to the deathless waters, Mina said in a quick silver whisper. Just tell me how to reach the waters. Simply tell me, and I'll leave here. I'll cause no trouble. What do you mean, trouble? Priya asked. Mina swallowed, her gaze was unflinching. Being strong means being ruthless, said Mina. I know that, and I am not afraid to do what needs to be done. Strong? Priya repeated. Oh, she remembered what strong had meant when she was a girl. Do you mean that you'll torture me? The other maidservants? Do you mean that you'll kill them to force me to show you the way? When Mina remained silent, Priya smiled at her, a fierce, hard smile. There would be no point anyway. I don't know the way. Don't lie to me, Mina said, voice suddenly high and thin as she could not control it. Her grip tightened. Ah, that hurt. I've asked the others. You've lived in the Regent's Mahal since you were a girl. If anyone knows the way, it's you. Mina, Priya said in the calmest voice she could muster, even as her heart raced. If I had the powers of the deathless waters at my fingertips, do you truly believe I'd be toiling in the Regent's household? Wouldn't I be more than a maidservant? Think sensibly. I think you are a coward, said Mina, suddenly viperous. I think you're willing to lick the Regent's boots, and you disgust me. You're nothing like him. Priya could not ask her who he was, could not say a word, because Mina released her and clasped her face instead. She dug sharp nails into Priya's jaw, tightened her hand like a vice. For a small woman, she was strong. There was a feverish light in her eyes. Tell me the truth. Priya felt Mina's hand dig in tighter and tighter. She forced words out through a mouth pressed tight by Mina's grip. Mina, stop. Mina's nails dug in harder. When Mina did not stop, Priya did the only sensible thing she could and stomped down on the other woman's foot, heel first, the full weight of her body behind it. Mina gave a shriek, her grip slipping, and Priya grabbed the hand still latched to her face. She dug her own nails into Mina's wrist and wrenched herself free. She could have yelled for help then, but Mina was panting before her, a crown mask clutched in her hands, and she had called Priya a temple daughter. Fear left Priya's lungs airless. She thought her brother, his eyes terror-wide in yellow firelight. She thought of darkness and water and his voice in her ears. Don't cry. Oh, Pri, don't cry. Just show me the way. Mina raised the mask. Mina, Priya said sharply. Mina, don't do it. Do not. I'll risk anything. I'll do anything, Mina said, voice taut with fear and despair as something else too, something poisonous. I have no choice. I can't go back without an answer. So tell me now, please. I'm being honest with you. I don't know. In the silence that followed, Priya heard a distant roar of thunder. This was your choice, said Mina. Her lower lip was trembling. I hope you know that. She placed the mask over her face. Priya stood still, cold except for the place where the bead warmed her wrist. She watched the crown mask press against Mina's skin. In the spaces between the bands of wood, she watched Mina's skin flush instantly, suffused with heat. Mina gave a gasp and raised her head. In the dim light, her face was like a lamp, glowing from a deep light within the strength of a sacred wood poured through her. Mina took a step forward, then she froze. A pained hiss escaped her through tightly clenched teeth. Take it off, Priya said urgently. Mina, right now, while you still can. But Mina did not take it off. She breathed in and out, hunched forward in pain. When she raised her head, the skin between the bands of wood was mottled and pinched. The wood stood out against it, having taken on the pearly varnished sheen of bones boiled clean of flesh. Mina had chosen her path. chosen to fling herself into the hands of death. Priya would not do the same. She ran. She didn't make it very far, barely even turned her body toward the door of the Triveni, before she felt a blow to her back that knocked the air from her lungs and threw her to the floor. Her hand slammed into stone. Pain jarred through her. She heaved herself onto her knees, struggling to get back to her feet. Mina shoved her back down with the efficient application of an elbow to the spine. Priya twisted onto her side, thinking of shoving Mina's weight off her, or no, that would fail. Slight as Mina was, she had a mask of sacred wood on her, and Priya could feel the new strength in Mina's hands already as she pinned Priya down against the stone, panting behind her mask, her eyes wild. Instead, Priya grasped for Mina's throat, trying to cut off air long enough for Priya to slip out from under her. She managed to get her hands on Mina's skin, digging her nails into the tendons there, even as Mina ground her knuckles into Priya's shoulder, her knees into her stomach. Priya gritted her teeth, tightened her hand, and Mina pinned her hands to the floor. "Stay," Mina commanded, and Priya tried to wrench her hands free, tried to twist to the side, but Mina simply tightened her grip until Priya's hands felt as if they were on fire, the bones of her wrists grinding painfully. "You feel it, don't you?" said Mina. She pressed her hands down harder, and Priya gasped. "I've tasted the deathless waters. I have its gifts." "Then you shouldn't need me," Priya forced out, turning her cheek down against the stone, letting her body go limp. She tried to look as if she'd given up the fight, let Mina believe she'd won. After all, in that moment, her hands pinning Priya's shoulders, grinding her bones down, knees in Priya's gut, she was the victor. Mina had realized it too, and that knowledge seemed to soften her. She leaned down closer, close enough for Priya to smell her skin, the rotten, cooked smoke of it. "I've only had a taste," Mina confessed, "and not from the source, only a mouthful from a vial, no more, and it's not—" Her grip spasmed, her skin was burning hot. "It's not enough." Priya tried to twist free again. She could not. "Tell me the way," Mina said heavily. "I don't have long." "The mask is killing you, Mina." "It's making me as strong as I need to be." Her words were confident enough, but Mina's eyes were red and barely blinked. She knew what she was becoming. "The deathless waters are killing me with hunger. The mask is killing me with power. And I don't care." There was a hitch in her voice. "But I need answers. For the sake of Ahiranya and the others like me who want to save it, I need to know the way." "I don't know the way, you idiot. You sniveling child. You called me a temple daughter. You know what I am. Did you never think to question my motives for coming here? As I should have questioned yours." Priya craned her neck, lifting her head one bare, painful increment. "I can hardly remember anything. Oh, I passed through the waters. I am once born. But when I watched my siblings and elders burn, I lost everything. I'm damaged goods. My mind—" Priya cut herself off, afraid she would do something ridiculous, like laugh at the dying woman above her who seemed liable to break Priya's wrists. "I can't help you. I've been trying to remember myself. I came here and I thought, I'll try. But now, perhaps I never will because of the foolhardiness. The only people who can show you the way now are all dead." "No." Mina's voice trembled like a flame, her eyes wild. "No, no." Mina's grip had eased just a little. She was distracted. Priya took her chance. She slammed her own head against Mina's, hard enough for the skull to rattle and her skin to burn from the heat of the sacred wood. In the moment it took Mina to recover from the shock of it, Priya managed to reach one hand up and wrench at the mask. She scrabbled with ugly, clumsy scrapes at her fingernails, worming her fingers between the blazing heat of the wood and the mottled char of Mina's flesh. She felt something smooth beneath her fingers, slick and overworn. She realized with horror that Mina's skin around the sockets of her eyes had burned clean down to tissue and bone. Mina gave a terrible shriek that rose and rose into the howl that echoed across the Triveni, its columns and its absences cutting through the crash of the rain that had begun to fall. Priya shoved her backward, climbed to her own feet. Her fingertips were blistering. Mina was still writhing on the floor, but Priya could hear footsteps in the corridor, could see Gauri and Seema in the doorway, suddenly frozen and open-mouthed. "Get out of here!" Priya yelled. "Go!" Tell me, Mina said raggedly, rising to her feet. One of you, please. When Seema saw Mina's face, she shrieked and clapped her hands over her mouth. She took a step back. Mina, Priya tried instead. Stop. They know nothing. Mina, stop. But Mina was not listening. She moved with a frenzied focus of someone on the knife's edge of death and desperation, crossing the floor and grabbing Gowri by the shoulders. Gowri screamed as she was jerked into the room and thrown against the pillar by Mina's desperate hands. The older maidservant's stick clattered to the ground. She scrabbled uselessly as Mina held her and gasped in, out, asking nothing, the whites of Mina's eyes red with blood. Gowri whimpered, slumped forward. With a furious shout, Priya leapt onto Mina's back. She wrenched Mina's head to an angle, forcing her fingers back under the edges of the loosened mask. When Mina did not even flinch, soil and sky, she had lost all sense of pain. Priya shoved her forward hard, crushing Gowri against the pillar as she slammed Mina's head against the stone, again and again and again. Then she released Mina, who crumpled just a little. Run, she barked at Gowri, and the older maidservant stumbled and fell, then rose to her feet again as Seema grabbed her by the arms and dragged her away. Guards, Seema was yelling. Guards, help, help! Mina gasped again, a long, thin exhalation that stretched into the hollow rasp. She turned, lightning quick, grasped Priya by the throat, lifted. Priya's feet were not touching the ground. Her lungs ached and burned as she could not move her hands, though she tried to raise them. Her control was failing. Her body felt as if it were swathed in cotton. Her lungs ached. Her vision was going black, but the dark was rich and textured, rippling like a lightless river. As Mina's hands tightened an increment further, Priya felt the dark cleave open. She felt water at her feet. 3 rivers joined around her ankles, swirling over her flesh. In the dizzying dark, she saw her brother's shadow, inked in red by the veins beneath her eyelids. She felt old memories clamor like bells, each one chiming against the next. An old temple sister testing her tolerance for pain, dipping her hand in hotter and hotter water as the elders watched. Little Nandi, her temple brother, helping her lay flowers and fruit in a shrine alcove, and filching one juicy segment of fibrous golden mango. Pilgrims falling prone before the masked elders, begging for a memento of Ahiranya's old glory. All things she'd lost, pieces of herself. Around her she could hear the Hirana singing, waiting, breathing for her. All she had to do. Her eyes snapped open. She clenched her hands around Mina's wrist as the lines on the Triveni surface flowed and shifted, throwing Mina briefly off balance, allowing Priya to break her chokehold and slam a fist into Mina's stomach. When Mina doubled forward, Priya punched her again, sending her stumbling across the floor. Priya was once born. She was, and the small tangle of memory she regained was enough to make the Hirana move with her, its stone constantly changing beneath Mina's feet like receding waves, throwing her back to the Triveni's edge where it lay open to the sky. As Mina stumbled, Priya paused to grab Gowri's stick from the ground. Only seconds had passed, but it felt as if ages had slipped away with her breath. You don't know what strength means, she murmured. Her voice was hoarse, but it was steady. She was glad of that. You don't, but I learned. I know what it means to carry the waters. She held Gowri's stick out before her, touched the tip of it to Mina's chest. Keeping her eyes on Mina, she said, Keep on moving. Finally, the Hirana was speaking to her once more. The response the Hirana had given her was on its surface had been the rumblings of a thing asleep. This was the wakeful voice, just a whisper, a nudge, but it was enough. Mina moved. She took slow, reluctant footsteps back as Priya nudged her with the stick toward the edge of the Triveni surface, where it melded into the Hirana's pock-marked, death-riddled stone. Mina stopped when her heels touched upon the edge. They stared at one another. The rain fell. Please, Mina whispered. Who is he? Priya's hands were damp with sweat and rain. She could hear shouting somewhere, drawing closer. Who was the temple son who gave you a taste of deathless waters? Who condemned you to die? Priya could not see Mina's expression through the mask, but she felt it. When Mina broke free from her shocked stupor, when Mina shoved forward, Gowri's stick bending between them, a fierce cry escaping her throat as she tried once more to get her hands around Priya's throat. Priya dropped the stick and grabbed Mina by the front of her blouse. The rage that took her then was all-consuming. How dare she? "The Hirana won't spare you," she said savagely. "You are not worthy." And then she shoved Mina hard with both hands. Mina fell without another sound. Priya stood frozen, her hands still outstretched before her. She sucked in a breath. Another. The sheer rage that had taken her left her abruptly. Her hands began to shake. Oh, spirits, what had she done? What had just happened? Her heart was still racing, but she couldn't feel her limbs. She lowered her hands, turned. The prisoner stood in the entrance of the northern chamber, watching her. The prisoner, the princess, was taller than Priya had thought she would be, and thinner. It was absurd to think that now, when Priya's life was finished, when she had murdered another woman in front of the emperor's sister, and spoken of the deathless waters. But the princess was tall and gaunt, and although her eyes were still red, she stood utterly still, unblinking, her mouth a smooth, unreadable line. She looked entirely unafraid. Had the princess seen what she'd done, heard what she'd said? The princess didn't look as if she thought Priya would kill her, and wildly for a moment Priya wondered if she would. No one could know what she was, but she was shaking. She couldn't. She didn't want to. The guards rushed in, the maidservants at their back. Pramila strode after them, a naked blade in her hands. "Princess Malini!" Priya's vision was still singed black. She could not think. She could not breathe. Ah, spirits above and below. Priya knew what they all saw and how damning it was. The walls marked with blood. Priya, a lowly maidservant, bleeding. The princess. "Pramila!" the princess gasped. Priya watched in numb surprise as the princess's face crumpled with tears, her cheeks suddenly blotchy. The princess grabbed ineffectually at the edges of her shawl, as if trying to draw up to her face to protect herself from the eyes of the male guards, who stood and gawped, their weapons drawn. But she dropped the shawl over and over again. Her hand was shaking. And then her teeth began to chatter as if shock had overcome her. The princess leaned back against the door. "Pramila, The Lady Pramila dropped the blade and raised to her side, clasping the princess by the arms. "You there," she snapped at one guard. "Restrain that servant, now." The guard strode across the room, grabbing Priya brutally by the arm. Priya bit in the inside of her cheek. She did not look at Gauri or Sima. She would not show how afraid she was. "She saved my life," the princess gasped. She was looking at Pramila, blinking rapidly, her expression terrified and open. "That maid. She saved me. There was an assassin, and she risked herself for my sake, and Pramila, I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe." The princess collapsed in Lady Pramila's arms, and for all her thinness, her weight dragged Pramila down with her, and Priya could only stare open-mouthed as everyone rushed to help the princess, as the guard's hand loosened upon her arm and softened by the lie.